If this message has traveled this far, it was not by chance. There are very particular instances in existence when the soul can grasp truth long before the mind has the capacity to comprehend or digest it. This persistent sensation, this inner knowing that refuses to quiet down and lingers beneath the surface of consciousness, carries purpose and profound significance. Existence is attempting to communicate something directly tied to this narrative, to this unique bond, and to a choice that can no longer be delayed. This is neither a threat nor an attempt to instill fear through these words. What is being addressed is a truth that asks to be acknowledged now, before silence inflicts more damage than any misguided statement ever could. The confusion has been felt intensely. There are days when everything seems to grow cold without apparent explanation, when physical and emotional space expands disproportionately, and then subsequent moments arrive when signs emerge, sudden memories or small gestures that reignite that flame which was never completely extinguished. This emotional instability is not coincidental and not a product of imagination. It serves as an exact reflection of an internal conflict that does not belong to the one hearing this message, but originates from the other side of the bond. A fierce battle is underway between pride and emotion, between fear of vulnerability and the need to remain, between releasing the bond or having the courage to face the truth. The universe and energy observe what escapes the naked eye. Those instances of deep longing are perceived when no one is around. The hidden fear is noticed. Words that are rehearsed before the mirror and never sent, and decisions that are postponed due to lack of courage. Because accepting true commitment necessarily means accepting profound transformation. And change is always frightening. It terrifies because loving outside of authenticity means relinquishing control, dismantling defense mechanisms built over years, and walking an unknown path where indifference can no longer be enjoyed. Perhaps a question has arisen about whether the situation is idealized, whether too much is being expected from something that seems stuck, or whether this bond is real or simply an illusion created by societal desire. This doubt cuts deeply because it exhausts the heart, exhausts it to feel that you are giving more, feeling more intensely, and waiting with seemingly endless patience. But it is necessary to accept this. Relief comes quietly. When a bond is born from a deep and authentic root, it does not expire with time or distance. On the contrary, it transforms, undergoes testing, stretches to the limit of resistance, but does not disappear when someone tries to escape from what is real, because life itself arranges confrontation with that escape. There is something that is about to break in this person who withdrew. This is not a negative breakdown, but a necessary breaking of masks, because a moment arrives when pretending that this bond does not matter becomes an impossible task. The emptiness left by absence weighs much heavier than fear of commitment, and it is there that unexpected actions begin to emerge. Not because everything was magically resolved, but because the soul can no longer conceal what screams silently. This message does not encourage forcing situations. Life does not demand pursuit, insistence, or enduring emotional exhaustion in attempting to convince someone. On the contrary, necessary observation and trust are needed, and above all, not betraying your own intuition out of fear of loss. Because if you choose from internal truth, destiny responds with clarity. But if you choose from fear and apprehension, everything tends to stagnate. Now there are two visible paths. On one hand, you continue doubting what you feel, minimizing signs, and trying to convince your heart that perhaps it is better to release before you inflict greater damage. This path seems safe and logical, but slowly distances from what was destined to grow and mature. On the other path, a person chooses a firm position, not begging for attention, not forcing encounters, but not closing the heart to possibility, simply remaining together with dignity and faith, and allowing the other side to go through their own process. The consequence of acting in accordance with this certainty is clarity. The consequence of not doing this is repetition of painful cycles, the same stories, the same emptiness, and the same unanswered questions. Life repeats lessons, not as punishment, but as a form of teaching, because it knows that within exists an enormous capacity to love, but also a tendency to endure too much when one should not. This is the relief that needs to be heard today. In this process, there is no loneliness. You are not imagining everything that is happening. There are subtle movements that have already begun, internal decisions that have not yet manifested on the material level, but can be felt on the energetic. Destiny does not hurry, but it does not stop either, and when the precise moment arrives, everything aligns in a way that logically the mind cannot control. If you feel this connection, write the word intuition in the comments. This person feels absence even when there is physical presence of others. She feels immediate risk of losing the bond even when security is pretended. Souls that are connected by something greater are not replaced. They recognize each other. And when someone tries to escape, life shows her again and again the same name, the same memory, and the same feeling. It is extremely important to pay attention to how your body and emotions feel. Not out of fear wanting results now, but out of peace knowing that what is coming is not born from momentary impulse, but from truth that has already matured in silence. And when this phase of uncertainty concludes, one can understand why nothing happened earlier, why it was necessary to walk this solitary path, and why this waiting was allowed before action. But to understand why this person runs from what they so desire, one must first understand the battle that is happening in their shadow. What depth psychology has tried to explain for centuries, and this reveals the true reason for their unstable behavior. To truly understand why distancing happens precisely when the bond seems deepest, it is necessary to resort to a vision that goes beyond the superficial. Carl Jung, one of the pioneers in studying the human psyche, spoke of concepts that explain with surgical precision what is happening in the mind and heart of the one who chooses distance. This is not absence of love or interest. What is being addressed is a much more complex psychological and spiritual phenomenon known as the mirror effect and the encounter with the shadow. Understanding this is key to stopping taking rejection personally and beginning to view it as a symptom of an awakening process. When two people share a bond of such magnitude, the bond acts as an impeccable mirror. The mirror does not judge. It simply reflects everything that is before it with absolute clarity. In this bond, the other person not only sees the light, affection, and understanding offered to them, but also sees a reflection of their own flaws, their unresolved fears, and their old wounds that have not yet healed. Jung explained that everything not confronted within causes destiny to appear outside. Therefore, the presence of someone who offers unconditional love and complete acceptance can frighten those who have not yet learned to love and accept themselves. This is where the concept of shadow comes into play. The shadow represents all those parts of personality that have been hidden, suppressed, or rejected out of fear of not being accepted. These can be deep insecurity, feelings of inadequacy, or fear of being abandoned. When the intensity of this love touches these dark zones, the instinctive reaction of the ego is defense. The person does not run from the one who loves them. They run from what this love makes them feel about themselves. She runs from the vulnerability that means showing herself as she is, without armor and without masks. The bond is so bright that it illuminates corners that this person would have preferred to keep in darkness. This is the origin of the instability that is so confusing. There are moments when she allows herself to feel and recognizes the beauty of the bond. In those moments, she approaches with tenderness and openness. But then, when that light becomes too intense, when it exposes too much of what she has avoided seeing in herself, her defense mechanisms are automatically activated. She withdraws, not because the bond diminished in importance, but precisely because it has become too significant. Because accepting it fully would mean accepting responsibility for her own emotional healing. And that is the hardest work a soul can undertake. This is why it is so fundamental not to interpret this distancing as lack of love. It is, in reality, an indicator that the bond is touching something very deep within the other person. It is touching wounds they did not even know existed. And the natural reaction of anyone who is not ready to face their own pain is to pull away from the trigger that activated it. But here is where energy work becomes crucial. When you understand this dynamic and stop reacting from a place of insecurity or neediness, the entire energy of the situation transforms. The pursuit, the insistence, the attempts to convince the other person that you are worthy of their love only reinforce their fear. Because unconsciously, the other person interprets this as confirmation that you also doubt your own value, that you also do not believe you deserve to be chosen freely. And this creates a vicious cycle. The more you pursue, the more they withdraw. The more you try to prove your worth, the less attractive you become in their eyes. But when you choose to honor your own value, when you step back not from resentment, but from profound respect for the process of the other person and for yourself, something extraordinary happens. The mirror stops reflecting desperation and begins reflecting certainty. The energy you emit is no longer one of lack, but of abundance. And this creates a psychological and spiritual void in the other person that is impossible to ignore. To become a magnetic personality, write the word magnet in the comments. At this point, the other person begins to experience what could be called symptoms of energetic withdrawal. They may attempt to provoke small reactions to test whether they are still under control, sending confusing signals or showing fleeting manifestations. These are not yet real attempts to return. They are safety checks to see if there is a rope. If you stand firm and do not react impulsively to these crumbs, the impact on their psyche doubles. Confirmation that something has deeply changed in the dynamic creates new urgency. The safe ground they walked on has disappeared, and now they must learn to hold on or find a way to repair the bridge they helped burn. The energetic void acts as an amplifier of truth. Without the noise of pursuit and drama, the pure essence of feelings remains. If the bond is real, silence will not kill it. On the contrary, it will make it sound with deafening clarity. Physical distance stops being relief and becomes quiet torment. The other side begins to feel an internal need to restore this bond, not because they are being forced to do so, but because their own soul begins to crave this energy that they previously rejected. She understands that the freedom she thought she was seeking feels empty without the person who gave meaning to that freedom. This is a delicate and powerful moment. The scales have balanced. There is no longer pursuer or pursued. There are only two who silently confront their truths. And while this attitude of external inaction but great internal movement persists, the ground is being prepared for the next phase. Because if silence becomes unbearable, and the ego no longer receives its usual nourishment, the person will try to fill that gap. She will try to distract herself, seek noise outside to drown out the noise inside. But as we will see further, she will very soon discover that when the bond is from the soul, there are no substitutes capable of deceiving the heart for long. At the moment when pursuit ceases, for the one who decided to leave, a silent but devastating phase begins. A phase in which distractions stop working. Once the energetic void settles, the initial reaction of the one who withdrew is usually not immediate surrender, but a desperate attempt at avoidance. The human mind, facing an uncomfortable truth or painful absence, instinctively seeks anesthesia. At this stage, it is very common for the other person to try to fill the void that emerged with noise, feverish activity, or the presence of other people. This is the last resource of the ego to prove to itself that it controls itself, that it can survive without this deep bond, and that the decision to leave was correct. She immerses herself in work, intensifies her social life, or seeks superficial distractions that allow her not to think, not to feel, and above all, not to remember. However, this is where an inevitable phenomenon occurs. If the bond is genuine, trying to find in other places what was found only in this special bond, she runs into an invisible wall. Life allows her to search, it allows her to explore options, and it allows her to try to connect with new energies. But it does this not to punish anyone, but to show the terrible difference between the superficial and what belongs to the soul. Each attempt at substitution becomes a painful reminder of what was lost. This person may date, meet new people, start conversations with romantic intentions, or simply seek external validation. But she will notice something that she will find deeply disturbing. Conversations seem empty, without rhythm and depth. The chemistry that naturally flows in a soul bond cannot be artificially established with someone else. This person will find herself sitting across from someone else, perhaps someone who meets all logical requirements to be a good partner. And yet they will feel unbearable existential boredom. She will notice that she has to force laughter, that she has to over-explain her thoughts, that this telepathic comfort does not exist where glances would be enough to understand each other. What she sought as a pleasant distraction paradoxically transforms into quiet torture. Comparison becomes inevitable and cruel for substitutes. Each flaw of the new encounter emphasizes the virtue of the attachment she left behind. The surface of others makes the depth of the bond she is trying to forget shine. At this moment, the justifications she gave herself to justify the escape begin to seem hollow. She told herself she needed space, that she needed freedom, that perhaps there is someone better or simpler, but reality shows her that simplicity is sometimes synonymous with emptiness, and that freedom is useless if it feels like a desert. The attempt to convince herself that time will destroy everything fails spectacularly. Far from erasing memory, distance and failed comparisons polish it, making it sharper and more desirable. She understands that losing this bond will not be an ordinary loss, but a deep wound that does not heal with distractions or new fleeting stories. When external distractions fail, silence returns with multiplied force. Then begins what is known in spiritual traditions as the dark night of the soul, but adapted to the psychology of resistance. This is a period of internal crisis where defenses fall. This person begins to lose the ability to sleep peacefully. Nights become long scenes of mental debates, conversations they had repeat again and again. Moments when she felt completely safe, and moments when fear made her retreat. She begins to question her own narrative. She can no longer blame either the intensity of the other, or circumstances, or inappropriate timing. She remains alone with her own emotional cowardice, and this is devastating for pride. Pride that previously served as armor now feels like a cage. This person wants to approach. She feels physical impulse to pick up the phone or seek encounters. But it is at this moment of internal exhaustion that a quiet but unstoppable change begins, when the ego breaks because it can no longer carry the time of its own contradictions. Beneath it, something more truthful, more honest emerges. The need for peace, not for victory, not for control, but for peace in the heart. The longing she tried to suppress for so long gains strength and transforms into clarity that can no longer be ignored. She understands that no other person, neither for distraction nor for escape, can fill the void from which she fled. And this realization, however painful it may be, is the beginning of readiness to open up again. And here, almost imperceptibly, energy begins to shift. Thoughts become softer, the heart less defensive. Not because fear disappeared, but because enlightenment has matured, that the real danger is not in proximity to the loved one, but in trying to live without them. In this silent surrender, the first real impulse to return arises. Not out of guilt, not out of loneliness, but from deep knowledge that what you ran from is precisely what you need to become whole again. And it is at this moment, on the threshold between fear and courage, that the moment is prepared when the heart finally does what the soul decided long ago. If you accept this love, write the word destiny in the comments.